A wealthy tycoon returns to his childhood estate ahead of schedule, only to be nearly floored by the scene waiting for him. That burst of laughter cracked through the mansion's tomb-like quiet like a gunshot, freezing Lisandro in place, his hand clutching the knot of his imported silk tie. It wasn't the usual whimpering, nor the rhythmic drone of life support equipment sustaining his only heir. This was something else entirely, a raw, untamed explosion of pure delight that simply shouldn't exist here. Lisandro, a titan who commanded half the nation's real estate market with a pen stroke, suddenly felt a cold, primal terror clawing up his spine. Tadeo was choking. He had to be. The specialist had been clear. Any intense excitement could collapse those fragile lungs. "Tadeo!" he roared, his executive mask slipping as he sprinted down the marble corridor, the slap of his $1,000 loafers echoing off the walls. He hit the French doors leading to the rear garden with enough force to make the tempered glass shudder in its frame. His eyes, trained to spot fine print loopholes and structural flaws, needed a split second to actually comprehend the tableau before him. It was so utterly surreal his mind initially rejected it. The sterile white uniforms were gone. The rhythmic ping of heart monitors was absent. There, basking in the 3 o'clock sun on the pristine lawn that was strictly off-limits, sat his son, Tadeo. This was the boy who hadn't voluntarily moved a muscle in 2 years. The boy existing in a twilight of clinical depression. He was strapped into his red wheelchair, sure, but the slump was gone. His frame was rigid, electric with energy. His fists were punched toward the azure sky, and that mouth, usually twisted in perpetual grimace, was gaping wide, belting out the laughter Lisandro had heard from the foyer. And standing directly in front of him was the architect of this miracle, or perhaps this insanity, Maria, the new cleaning lady. Gone was the mandatory gray uniform. Instead, she rocked faded blue scrubs, a dirt-streaked white apron, and, most absurdly, neon yellow rubber gloves catching the sunlight. She was balanced precariously on one leg, the other extended back in a perfect arabesque, graceful yet ridiculous, like a flamingo wearing work boots. Her arms rippled like swan wings, and her face, glistening with sweat and devoid of makeup, beamed with a radiance that rivaled the sun itself. "Come on, champ, feel that rhythm," she hollered, pirouetting in place, while whipping a garden hose around to cast a shimmering rainbow arc right over the boy's head. Tadeo was practically howling with glee, his stiff shoulders trying to match her beat, just as Lisandro's black leather briefcase slipped from his grip. It slammed onto the terrace stone with a heavy thud, the sound instantly shattering the garden's fragile magic. Maria froze mid-spin, wobbling for a heartbeat before planting both feet firmly in the dirt. The joy evaporated from her face the moment she spotted the looming silhouette in the doorway. Lisandro stood there, pale and panting, his eyes devoid of gratitude for his son's laughter. Instead, they burned with volcanic rage. All he saw was a low-level domestic worker gambling with a disabled child's life, exposing him to harsh sun, dust, and unauthorized physical strain. He took a shaky step forward. This wasn't a celebration to him, it was criminal negligence. "What in the hell is going on here?" he bellowed, his voice scattering the birds from the trees. Tadeo's laughter died in his throat, his arms dropping like lead weights onto the armrests. That spark in his eyes was snuffed out, replaced by the instinctive dread summoned by his father's boardroom voice. Maria, however, didn't flinch or look away. She snapped off one yellow glove, took a deep breath, and squared up to the master of the house. Not like a terrified servant, but like a lioness shielding her cub from a hunter. It was the inevitable collision of two different universes. The man who thought a checkbook could fix anything stood against the woman who knew wealth meant nothing when the spirit was shattered. The silence trailing Lisandro's outburst hung heavier than the humid afternoon air. Jaw clenched, the tycoon stormed down the terrace steps 2 at a time, marching toward the wheelchair as if liberating Tadeo from a hostage situation. "Step away from my son," Lisandro commanded, leveling an accusatory finger at Maria. "Right now." Maria stepped back, not out of submission, but to yield space to the father, though she refused to retreat completely. She stood her ground, rubber-clad hands clutching her apron, watching Lisandro drop frantically to his knees beside Tadeo. "Tadeo, son, look at me. Look at me." Lisandro cupped the boy's face with both hands, frantically scanning for fever, for signs of suffocation, for pain. "Are you hurting? Did she harm you? Why is your face so flushed? You're perspiring." He whipped a silk handkerchief from his pocket and began dabbing at the child's brow with sharp, anxious strokes. "It is just sweat, Mr. Lisandro," Maria cut in, her voice holding a steeliness that defied her lowly station. He is sweating because he is moving, because he is finally alive. Lissandro shot to his feet, wheeling on her with a glare that could have withered a boardroom full of executives. "Silence," he snapped. "Your job is scrubbing toilets and dusting shelves, not dragging my son into the blazing sun without medical clearance or forcing him into this ridiculous spectacle. Do you have the slightest concept of how delicate his spine is? Do you know what I pay top specialists to tell me he requires absolute bed rest? Those doctors bill me a fortune just to keep him immobile." "Well, I don't charge a dime to make him happy," Mireia retorted, sharp as a tack. The sheer audacity of the response left Lissandro momentarily struck dumb. No one dared speak to him that way, certainly not someone wearing rubber cleaning boots. "You are finished here," Lissandro murmured, his tone dropping to a dangerous register. "Gather your belongings. You have exactly 10 minutes to vacate my property. If you are still on the premises when I return, I am calling the authorities to report child endangerment." Just then, a ragged guttural sound tore from Tadeo's throat. No? Lissandro froze. He turned slowly toward his son. Tadeo hadn't spoken a word in ages. The boy's depression had locked him in selective mutism for months, yet here he was, warring against his own anatomy, face crimson with exertion, neck veins bulging. Tadeo lifted a trembling hand, not reaching for his father but stretching toward Mireia. His fingers clawed at the air, desperate to graze the fabric of the woman's soiled apron. "Don't go," Tadeo rasped, forcing the syllables out with a violent effort that seemed to shred his vocal cords. Mireia bit down hard on her lower lip to hold back tears, though her eyes burned with a fierce protective pride. Lissandro stared at his son's outstretched arm, then at the maid and back to the boy. The math simply didn't add up. His child was defending the help. His child was speaking. "Tadeo, are you distressed?" Lissandro stammered, scrambling to regain command of the scene. "She dances!" Tadeo screamed, and for the first time in years he met his father's gaze not with submission, but with defiance. "I dance." Suddenly, a dark silhouette loomed in the doorway. It was Griselda, the head housekeeper. She stood there in her pristine black uniform, a mask of counterfeit concern plastered over her features. She had been lurking by the window, biding her time for the perfect moment to strike. She despised Mireia, hated her youth, her vitality, and most of all, how Tadeo seemed to come back to life whenever that nobody entered the room. "Mr. Lissandro," Griselda purred, gliding forward with the silent grace of a viper, "I am so terribly sorry for this disturbance. I explicitly warned that girl to stick to the protocol. I told her the boy needed his nap, but she simply refuses to listen. Just look at him. The poor thing is on the verge of a breakdown." Griselda placed a steadying hand on Lissandro's shoulder, validating his panic. "You are right," Lissandro muttered, retreating into his fortress of cold logic. Tadeo's emotional outburst wasn't progress. It was hysteria induced by a stranger. He turned back to Mireia, hardening his heart against the image of his pleading son. "Do not make me call security. Get out." Mireia glanced at Tadeo. Tears were already streaming down his cheeks. The explosive joy of moments ago had curdled into profound anguish. If she walked away now, he would sink back into the abyss, and this time he might never resurface. Mireia lifted her chin. She had no fortune, no influence, but she possessed something this arrogant billionaire had lost long ago. Courage. "If I leave now, your son goes back to staring at a wall all day," Mireia declared, ignoring Griselda and locking eyes with Lissandro. "You claim he is fragile. I tell you he is a warrior who is slowly dying of boredom and loneliness. I will leave if you command it. This is your house, after all. But before I go, ask yourself one thing, Mr. Lissandro. When was the last time your son lifted his arms? Not because he needed to be carried, but to celebrate the simple fact that he is alive." The question hung in the humid afternoon air, heavy and accusatory. Lissandro felt a lump form in his throat that he couldn't quite swallow. He looked at Tadeo's arms, still trembling in the air, fighting gravity, refusing to drop. It was undeniable. The muscles were engaged. Lissandro glanced down at his watch, a rose-gold Patek Philippe. He needed a logical exit strategy, a way to prove her wrong without looking like a monster in front of his boy. "You have 24 hours, Lissandro barked, refusing to look at her. "Tomorrow, at this exact time, I will return with the doctor. I am bringing in Dr. Valadares, the finest neurologist in the city. If he finds a single bruise or the slightest strain resulting from this stunt, you are finished. I won't just fire you. I will blacklist you so thoroughly you won't be able to scrub a sidewalk in this country again." Griselda choked back a scandalized gasp. Maria gave a single, sharp nod, signing her name to this suicide pact. Deal accepted. Lissandro snatched his briefcase from the ground and marched back toward the manor. He could feel Tadeo's gaze burning a hole between his shoulder blades. This wasn't a victory. For the first time in years, the iron grip he held over his own home felt like it was slipping. And the most terrifying part? A tiny, buried fragment of his soul actually wanted to see what would happen when the sun came up. The moment the heavy oak doors of Lissandro's study clicked shut, the atmosphere in the garden shifted instantly. The restraint keeping Griselda silent in front of the master evaporated, replaced by pure, distilled venom. The housekeeper loomed over Maria like a stretching shadow, her sensible heels stabbing violently into the lawn with every step. "Think you're clever, don't you, you little upstart?" Griselda hissed, stopping inches from Maria's nose. Her breath reeked of stale coffee and disdain. "You think just because the boy grunted and Mr. Lissandro is drowning in absentee father guilt, you've somehow punched your ticket to paradise?" Maria stood her ground. She kept working, adjusting Tadeo's footrest to ensure the boy was comfortable after such an emotional upheaval. "I'm not looking for salvation, Mrs. Griselda. I just don't want Tadeo to feel like another piece of furniture in his own living room." Maria replied without looking up, gently wiping a bead of sweat from the boy's temple. Griselda snapped, grabbing Maria's arm and sinking her manicured claws into the maid's flesh. "Listen to me, you penniless trash. I have run this house for 15 years. I've watched certified nurses, imported therapists, and specialists with 3 PhDs come and go. They all last a month, tops. Tadeo is a lost cause. He is nothing but a vegetable that inhales money. And you, with your pathetic little dances and filthy hands, won't even last the 24 hours he gave you." Maria ripped her arm free with a sharp jerk. Her dark eyes flashed with a ferocity that made Griselda falter for a split second. "Tadeo, can you hear me?" Maria lowered her voice, trying to shield the boy from the housekeeper's malice. "He understands everything. If you ever call him a vegetable in front of me again, I won't wait for Mr. Lissandro to fire me. I will personally make sure he knows exactly how you treat his son when no one is watching." Griselda turned crimson with rage but clamped her mouth shut. She knew that for all his icy detachment, Lissandro was ruthless if he felt someone was damaging his property or his bloodline. "Enjoy your 15 minutes of fame," Griselda muttered, smoothing down her uniform. "Tomorrow, when Dr. Valadares sees you've just agitated the boy's nerves, I'll be the one opening the gate so you can crawl back to your miserable slum." Griselda spun on her heel and stormed toward the house. Night settled over the mansion like a heavy slab of marble. In the main dining hall, a table built for 12 was set for 1. Lissandro sliced his steak in silence. The screech of the knife against fine china echoed through the empty room. He couldn't focus. His mind kept drifting back to that image from the afternoon. Tadeo's arms raised high. That laugh. He hadn't heard that sound since before the accident that took his wife and confined his son to that chair. He shoved the plate away, his appetite gone. He stood up and wandered toward the ground-floor hallway where Tadeo's adapted suite was located. Usually, by this hour, the night nurse would have administered a mild sedative, leaving the house in dead silence. But tonight, the silence was broken. As he approached the slightly ajar door, he heard something unexpected. It wasn't loud music, but a low humming, a soft, rhythmic melody accompanied by a gentle tapping sound. Wood against wood. Lissandro pressed his back against the wall, peering through the crack. The overhead lights were off, leaving the room bathed in the glow of a single warm lamp. Maria sat cross-legged on the floor beside Tadeo's hospital bed. She held 2 wooden spoons from the kitchen, tapping them gently against the bed rail to create a beat. Clack, clack, thud, clack, clack, thud. "That's what a heartbeat sounds like, Tadeo," she whispered with a smile. Clack, clack, thud. "If your heart has a rhythm, follow it. Come on, give it a try. Just one finger." Lissandro held his breath. According to every medical report, Tadeo's neural connection to his limbs was practically non-existent, severed by brain trauma and deepened by depressive atrophy. It should have been impossible. Tadeo lay there, his eyes wide and locked onto Maria, his right hand resting on the mattress, his face twisted in extreme concentration, a mask of pure effort. Clack, clack, thud. Tadeo's index finger twitched. It wasn't a spasm, it was a faint, almost imperceptible tap, but it was rhythmic. He struck the sheet in perfect time with Maria's spoon. "That's it," she gasped in a thrilled whisper, grabbing the boy's hand to kiss his knuckles. "You're a natural-born percussionist, Tadeo. It's in your DNA." The boy beamed. It was a lopsided, weary grin, but it was genuine. Lissandro felt his knees buckle. He backed away from the threshold without a sound, vanishing into the corridor's shadows. His pulse hammered against his ribs. What he just saw contradicted every expensive diagnosis he had ever purchased. A stranger, armed with nothing but wooden spoons, was succeeding where state-of-the-art Swiss technology had failed. Yet skepticism gnawed at him. Was this a breakthrough or just a fluke? Valadares would arrive tomorrow. In 24 hours, he would know the truth. Either he was witnessing a divine intervention, or he was just another grieving father hallucinating progress. The next day broke with a leaden, overcast sky, as if the atmosphere itself braced for a verdict. At exactly 10 in this morning, a sleek black German sedan pulled into the circular driveway. Dr. Valadares emerged, a towering figure with silver hair and gold-rimmed spectacles, clutching a leather satchel worth more than Mireya's entire existence. Lissandro met him in the foyer while Griselda lurked a step behind, hands clasped and wearing a look of smug, preemptive triumph. "Lissandro, old friend," Valadares boomed in a rich baritone, gripping the billionaire's hand. "You mentioned a motor function emergency on the phone. Has the boy suffered seizures?" "No, Antonio." Lissandro looked wrecked, dark circles carving hollows under his eyes from a sleepless night. "He moved, voluntarily, and he laughed." The specialist raised a doubtful eyebrow. "Laughter? With his diagnosis of severe abulia?" "Diaphragmatic spasms often mimic joy, Lissandro. Do not torture yourself with false hope. However, let us examine the patient." They marched upstairs like a funeral procession. Inside the room, Mireya stood by the window, throwing the drapes wide to capture the meager daylight. Tadeo sat upright in his wheelchair, scrubbed clean and dressed in denim and cotton rather than his usual hospital gown. The change in attire was striking enough, but Dr. Valadares didn't even glance at the woman responsible. He beelined for the boy, unholstering a penlight and a reflex hammer like weapons. "Hello, Tadeo. Let's check those pupils," he recited mechanically, prying the boy's eyelids open with icy, clinical fingers. Tadeo recoiled at the intrusion. The boy's eyes darted around, seeking Mireya. "Easy, champ," she whispered. "Quiet, please," Valadares commanded, never breaking his gaze. "I require absolute focus." The examination dragged on for 20 excruciating minutes. The specialist prodded, tapped, and manipulated Tadeo's limbs. There was zero response. He was frozen stiff, locked down by the doctor's sterile intimidation. Each command to move a finger only made the boy retreat further into his shell. Lissandro watched from the shadows, feeling his fragile hope disintegrate with every passing second. Nothing. "Unchanged," Valadares declared, packing away his tools. "His reflexes are identical to what we charted 6 months ago. Lissandro, whatever you witnessed yesterday was likely a muscle spasm triggered by stress or sensory overload. There is no cognitive engagement. The boy's brain remains offline." Griselda exhaled loudly, a performance of pity masking her delight. She shot Mireya a smirk. "I am so terribly sorry, Mr. Lissandro," she crooned. "I warned you that uneducated help would only bring you heartbreak and false promises." Lissandro shut his eyes, crushed. The disappointment was a physical weight in his chest. "Thank you, Antonio," he whispered. "I appreciate you coming out so quickly." "Wait." Mireya's voice sliced through the gloom. Heads snapped toward her. Valadares stared at her as if a lamp had suddenly started lecturing him. "He isn't responding because you're handling him like a broken engine, not a human child." Mireya stepped into the light. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steel. "Fear paralyzes him. Life wakes him up." The doctor bristled. "Lissandro, remove this woman from my presence at once." "Let me prove it," Mireya cried out, locking eyes with the father. "You promised me 24 hours. My time isn't up. Just give me 2 minutes." Lissandro looked from the indignant doctor to the smug housekeeper, and finally to the nanny. There was a fire in her desperation that painfully reminded him of his late wife. 2 minutes, Lissandro clipped. Mireya didn't hesitate. She abandoned the medical tools. She rushed to a portable speaker she'd brought from home, set it on the nightstand, and hit play. A rhythmic, joyful cumbia Valadares scoffed, shaking his head. You have got to be kidding me. Blocking out the skeptic, Mireia knelt before Tadeo so they were eye to eye. She started tapping a gentle rhythm on her own thighs. Eyes on me, Tadeo, she beamed. Forget the white coat. Pretend we're back in the garden, just the two of us. Remember the beat? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. She gently grasped his limp hands, guiding them to match the tempo. The boy locked onto her gaze. Tears welled up in his eyes, not from sorrow but from the sudden spark of recognition. The melody surged into the void where medicine had failed. You've got this, little king. Show your dad. Up. And then, the impossible happened. It wasn't a twitch. Tadeo summoned a primal force from his gut, broke the chains of his paralysis, and with a titanic effort that shook his entire frame, he launched his right arm skyward. Fingers splayed like he was trying to claw down the ceiling. Ah! Tadeo roared, a raw, raspy cry of pure victory. Dr. Valadares lost his grip on his pen. Clatter. Griselda stumbled back against the wall, her face draining of color. Lissandro stood frozen in place. He wasn't looking at a reflex. He was looking at sheer will. He was watching his son go to war. Tadeo held that arm aloft for 5 agonizing seconds before letting it drop, completely spent, but wearing a grin. The room went dead silent, save for the upbeat track still spinning in the background. Lissandro crossed the floor. He ignored the doctor completely, dropped to his knees, and grasped the hand that had just reached for the stars. He pressed his lips to it. For the first time in years, a lonely tear cut a path down the tycoon's cheek. I saw it, Lissandro whispered. I saw you, son. He stood up, the iron mask sliding back into place as he turned to Valadares, but his eyes were burning with a new fire. Antonio, mail me your invoice, and take your hopeless case prognosis with you. My boy just proved 10 years of medical textbooks wrong. Flushed crimson with shame, the doctor gathered his things and scrambled out, mumbling scientific nonsense. Lissandro turned to Mireia. She was breathing hard, as if she had been the one lifting the weight. You staying? Lissandro asked. It wasn't a request. It was a decree. I'm doubling your salary. From now on, nobody touches my son but you. Mireia nodded, wiped out but beaming. I don't need double, sir. I just need permission to do my job. In the shadows, Griselda watched. Her scheme had crumbled, her authority dismantled by 2 minutes of cumbia music. As Lissandro awkwardly embraced Tadeo, Griselda's hand drifted to her apron pocket. Her fingers brushed the cold steel of the solid gold Rolex she had swiped from Lissandro's study that morning. If medical science couldn't drive Mireia out, a felony charge would. Laugh while you can, Griselda thought, slithering out of the room like a viper retreating into the dark. Tomorrow, you'll be nothing but a common thief. The manor's kitchen was a fortress of stainless steel and cold marble, restricted airspace where only authorized personnel could tread. To Tadeo, it was the great unknown, a no-fly zone forbidden by doctors terrified of germs, sharp edges, and heat. Combine above for flow. For years, his meals had arrived on sterilized trays, lukewarm mush served in a dim room. Today, the rulebook was getting torched. Mireia barged through the swinging doors with enough momentum to make the sous chefs jump out of their skins. Morning, crew, Mireia announced, parking Tadeo smack in the middle of the prep island. Meet the new head chef. The staff exchanged looks of sheer panic. They knew if Griselda walked in and saw the boy here, heads would roll. Mireia, are you crazy? One girl whispered, frantically wiping her hands on her apron. Mr. Lissandro will execute us. He can't be in here. There's flour, open flames. The kid's name is Tadeo, and he is dying of boredom. Mireia cut her off, locking the wheelchair brakes. And if the boss asks, tell him we're doing advanced occupational therapy. She spun Tadeo around. The kid's eyes were saucers. He had never seen such organized chaos. The steam rising from stockpots, the sharp sting of frying garlic and onions, the clang of heavy pans. He inhaled deeply, drinking in the life he had been starved of. All right, Tadeo, Mireia said, heaving a 5-kilogram sack of flour. Doctors say you need to improve your grip strength. I say you need to learn how to make a pizza. Mireia dumped a mound of white powder right onto the black plastic tray of Tadeo's wheelchair. A white cloud puffed up, making Tadeo scrunch his nose. Achoo! The sneeze echoed in the sudden silence. The cooks held their breath. Tadeo opened his eyes, saw his white dusted lashes in the reflection of a ladle, and cracked up. A bubbling, messy, genuine belly laugh. Maria grinned and plunged Tadeo's hands into the doughy mountain. "Feel that?" she whispered in his ear. "Soft, cool. Squeeze it, Tadeo. Squeeze it with rage. Let it all out." Through the crack of the service door, dark eyes watched with the focus of a predator. Griselda held her mobile phone high, recording every single second. "Perfect," Griselda whispered to herself, a toxic smirk pulling at the corner of her mouth. Exposure to allergens, unsanitary environment, choking hazard due to dust inhalation. This wasn't therapy. It was a one-way ticket to the unemployment line, you fool. On the small screen, Tadeo looked like a ghost dusted in white, hammering away at the dough with clenched fists. The video captured none of the joy. Without the audio, he just looked like a child flailing uncontrollably in the middle of a hygiene disaster. Griselda was a master at editing the truth. She would crop out the laughter and keep only the violent, jerky movements. Inside the kitchen, however, the rehabilitation was reaching a fever pitch. "Harder!" Maria cheered, shoving a wooden spoon into his grip. "That dough is the enemy. Destroy it." Tadeo, his face smeared with flour and eyes burning with a feverish adrenaline, pummeled the mixture. Thud, thud, thud. The impact sent shockwaves up his withered arm, jarring nerve endings awake after a years-long coma. "Look!" Tadeo rasped, finding that gravelly voice he was finally starting to use more often. "Look at this!" Summoning every ounce of titanic strength, he scooped the sticky mass with both hands, ripped it from the tray, and heaved it forward. The ball of dough sailed 3 feet through the air and landed with a wet splat, right on Maria's chest. The room went dead silent. Maria stared down at her ruined uniform, then snapped her gaze up to Tadeo, feigning outrage. For a split second, the boy covered his mouth in terror. Then, Maria grabbed a handful of white powder and gently tossed it into his face. "War!" She screamed the battle cry. The kitchen erupted. Tadeo howled with laughter. Caught up in the sheer impossibility of the scene, the cooks began banging pots like drums to the rhythm of the boy's shrieks, a pagan festival right in the middle of a sterile sanctuary. Behind the swinging door, Griselda cut the recording. She had enough ammunition. She slid the phone into her pocket with care. "Laugh while you can, kid," she thought, retreating down the dim hallway. "Because once your father sees this footage, that woman will be banned from the property, and you'll go back to your room where you belong. Clean, safe, alone." Griselda headed straight for Lissandro's study. She knew the master of the house would be home within the hour. She had plenty of time to set the stage for the final act. She pulled the heavy, glittering object she'd swiped that morning from her pocket, the gold Rolex. She slipped into the small service room assigned to Maria. It was a monk's cell of a room, austere and cramped. Griselda went straight for the battered backpack resting on the bed and unzipped it. Inside lay a change of clothes, a single apple, and a creased photograph of a little girl. "Pathetic," Griselda sneered. She dropped the $50,000 watch into the depths of the bag, burying it beneath the dirty laundry. She pulled the zipper shut. The trap was set. This wouldn't be a firing for negligence. It would be termination for grand larceny. That meant prison time. Late afternoon sunlight bathed the mansion in gold. Following the chaos in the kitchen, Maria had cleaned Tadeo up, but she hadn't tucked him into bed. Instead, she'd wheeled him to the conservatory, a glass cathedral of tropical plants Lissandro kept climate-controlled for his prize-winning orchids. Lissandro pulled into the driveway early. The negotiation with the Japanese investors had been a disaster. But his mind wasn't on profit margins, it was on his son. The memory of Tadeo raising his hand haunted him. Was it a fluke? Or was Dr. Valadares right? Was he just a foolish old man chasing a miracle that didn't exist? He entered the foyer expecting the usual tomb-like silence. Griselda intercepted him instantly, wearing that grim, guard dog expression he was starting to despise. "Mr. Lissandro," she began. Sen, reaching for his coat. "I must report a serious incident in the kitchen today. I have a video that—" "Not now, Griselda," Lissandro snapped, brushing past her. "Where is my son?" "In the greenhouse, sir, but I must warn you she's kept him there for hours. The humidity is terrible for his respiratory system." Lissandro tuned her out. He marched toward the glass structure. His shoes made no sound on the gravel path. When he reached the conservatory, he didn't barge in. He paused, hidden behind the fronds of a massive fern, peering through the transparent panes. The sight stole the air from his lungs. Tadeo wasn't in his wheelchair. He was on the floor, lying on a thick yoga mat. Maria sat opposite him, legs spread wide in a V-shape, with the soles of Tadeo's feet pressed flat against hers. "Come on, Tadeo. I'm not a wall, I'm a spring," Maria said. Her voice was muffled by the glass but distinct. "Push me. If you don't push back, I'm going to crush you." Maria leaned her weight forward, pressing gently but firmly against the boy's legs, forcing his knees to bend toward his chest. "Push!" she commanded. Tadeo's face was beet red, slick with sweat. His jaw was clenched, a guttural growl escaping his throat. It was the raw sound of pure physical struggle. Lissandro's instinct was to rush in and stop the madness. It looked like torture. Tadeo's legs were like fragile twigs. They were going to snap. His hand froze on the brass handle the moment he locked eyes with his boy. Gone was the fear, replaced by a fierce, competitive fire. The same steel Lissandro saw in his own reflection every morning before crushing a multi-million-dollar merger. That was the family legacy staring back at him. "Now!" Tadeo roared, and the impossible happened. This wasn't some fairy tale magic, it was sheer willpower hijacking biology. That right leg, the one every specialist had written off as dead weight, suddenly fired, snapping straight with a violent, deliberate jolt. Impact. His foot connected hard with Maria's, knocking her off balance and sending her tumbling onto the rug in a fit of theatrical laughter. "Ref! Where's the ref?" she hollered, throwing her hands up from the floor. "That's a foul! Excessive roughness!" Tadeo cracked up, slapping the floorboards in pure delight. "I won. Knocked you down," Tadeo stammered out, the words tumbling over each other but clear as day. Lissandro's grip on the door slackened, and he stumbled backward into the hallway like a man intoxicated by shock. He braced himself against the cold exterior brick, sliding down the rough surface until he was crouched on the pavement. Burying his face in his palms, a guttural sob ripped through him, shaking his broad frame with violent force. He wept for every single second he had wasted. He cried for every time he told his boy to just rest instead of fight, realizing a woman in tattered shoes had achieved in 24 hours what his millions couldn't buy in a lifetime: his son's dignity. Upstairs, Griselda peered through the window, watching the master of the house crumble in the garden below. To her, those tears weren't a sign of redemption. They were the stench of weakness. "He's losing his damn mind," she hissed. "That witch has her claws in him, too." She turned and bolted down the stairs. The clock was ticking. That kitchen footage wouldn't be enough leverage with Lissandro in such a fragile emotional state. She needed a kill shot. Snatching the hallway landline, she punched in the number for the private estate's security chief, a sequence she knew by heart. "Officer Ramirez, it's Griselda calling from the Montemayor estate. Yes, we need you immediately. There's a situation. I believe a priceless family heirloom has gone missing, and I've detained a suspect. Get here before she makes a run for it." She slammed the receiver down, her hands trembling not with fear, but with the thrill of the hunt. Back in the greenhouse, Maria settled onto the floor across from Tadeo. "You did it, champ," she whispered, gently patting the knee that had justified the odds. "Tomorrow, we go for both feet." "Tomorrow," Tadeo echoed, clutching the word like a lifeline. For the first time, the future wasn't just a concept, it was a promise. Maria glanced back toward the main house. A knot tightened in her stomach, a cold shadow creeping in that had nothing to do with the temperature in the sunroom. She forced a smile for the boy. "Yeah, tomorrow we fly." She had no way of knowing the security sirens were already screaming toward them. She didn't know her tomorrow was about to be erased. Lissandro wiped his face, straightened his silk tie, and rose to his feet, his mind made up. He was going to walk in there, hand Maria a blank check, and beg her to live in the mansion permanently. Every other doctor was getting fired today. He was going to. The screech of tires on the gravel driveway shattered his train of thought. Red and blue strobes began to dance violently against the mansion walls. Lissandro narrowed his eyes. He hadn't summoned anyone. He marched toward the front gate, protective instincts flaring, unaware that this time the enemy wasn't storming the castle from the outside. The enemy was already inside, and she had a set of keys. The private security cruiser's light bar swept across the facade, painting the pristine white columns in alternating washes of emergency crimson and blue. Lissandro froze in the doorway, throwing a hand up to shield his vision from the glare. The heart that had just been soaring with the miracle of his son now sank like a stone, heavy with dark foreboding. Officer Ramirez, a hulking figure in tactical gear with a face that had forgotten how to smile, stepped out of the vehicle and hitched up his duty belt. Flanking him, two more guards fanned out with military-grade precision. "Afternoon, Mr. Lissandro," Ramirez said, tipping the brim of his cap. "We responded to the emergency dispatch." We're here to lock down the perimeter and take the suspect into custody. Lissandro descended the porch steps, his confusion deepening into anger. Emergency dispatch? What suspect? Ramirez, I have no idea what you're talking about. I didn't authorize the call. It was me, sir. Griselda's voice quivered from the shadows behind him, dripping with manufactured distress. The housekeeper stepped into the light, dabbing at imaginary tears with a handkerchief. You? Lissandro stared at her, dumbfounded. Griselda, I am in the middle of a life-changing moment with my son. What the hell is going on here? Griselda leaned in close, dropping her voice to a conspiratorial whisper to keep the guards out of the loop, manufacturing a sense of shared secrecy. Sir, I hesitated to worry you without proof, but when I dropped off your coffee this morning, I noticed the watch display cabinet had been jarred open. She let the silence hang there for a moment, keeping her eyes fixed dramatically on the floorboards. The solid gold precedent is gone. The one your father gave you. Lissandro felt the air leave his lungs as if he'd been punched. That wasn't just gold, it was his heritage. Yet, his thoughts were still anchored in the greenhouse, pushing back against the material loss. It's just a watch, Griselda. I likely left it at the club or on my nightstand. Call off the search. I already looked, sir. I turned this house upside down, she pressed, clutching his arm with urgency. And nobody went into that study today. Nobody but the new girl. I saw her sneaking out with the trash earlier, glancing over her shoulder like she was terrified of being seen. Mireya. Lissandro let out a dry, incredulous chuckle. Griselda, be serious. That woman just got Tadeo to move his leg for the first time. You think I give a damn about a timepiece when she's actually saving my son? Griselda's expression hardened into stone. She knew exactly where to strike, the deep-seated paranoia of the wealthy. Scammers are always charming, sir. They win your heart, they win the boy, and while you're distracted by the miracle, they're robbing you blind with the other hand. Just let them check her bag. If it's empty, I will beg for forgiveness on my knees. But if she has it, you are leaving your son with a criminal. The crunch of tires rolling over gravel cut through the tense conversation. Mireya wheeled Tadeo up the garden path, humming a soft melody, completely unaware of the storm brewing at the doorstep. Tadeo sat tall, covered in garden dirt but glowing with a joy they hadn't seen in years. The flashing police lights stopped Mireya cold. Her smile vanished instantly. Is something wrong? She asked, eyeing the armed men. Officer Ramirez stepped forward, cutting off her path to the front door. Ma'am, we need to search your personal effects, standard protocol regarding a reported theft. She looked to Lissandro for help, for a defense, but he stood silent, his gaze shifting uneasily between her and the housekeeper. The poisonous seed Griselda had planted was already taking root. It was possible. Maybe the whole thing was a performance. Tadeo's laughter, the sudden progress. Maybe it was all just smoke and mirrors to clear out the safe. Theft? Mireya released the wheelchair and stepped forward, bristling with indignation. I haven't stolen a thing. I've been with the boy all day. Then you won't mind if we take a look inside your bag, Griselda said, pointing to the worn satchel hanging from Mireya's shoulder. Search it then, Mireya shouted, ripping the bag off and tossing it at Ramirez's feet. I have nothing to hide. I may be poor, but I am not a thief. Sensing the hostility, Tadeo began to whimper. He struggled to turn his chair, trying to wedge himself between Mireya and the uniforms. Ramirez knelt down. The zipper tore open, a harsh sound in the heavy afternoon silence. Lissandro held his breath. Let it be empty. He prayed silently. Please let there be nothing. He desperately wanted to be wrong, to fire Griselda for her paranoia. The officer's gloved hand dug past a sweaty shirt, a bruised apple, and a set of keys before freezing at the bottom. A tiny, triumphant smirk flickered across Griselda's face before vanishing instantly. Ramirez pulled his hand out. The afternoon sun caught the object, sending a blinding reflection across the driveway. Gold. Heavy, undeniable gold. The president watch dangled from the guard's grip like a judge's gavel swinging down. Lissandro felt the ground drop out from under him. Mireya covered her mouth, her eyes wide with absolute terror. That isn't mine, she screamed, her voice cracking with panic. I didn't put that there. I swear on my life someone planted it. Griselda let out a theatrical sigh and turned to her boss. There's your miracle, sir. Tadeo let out a scream, a raw, formless sound of pure fury, slamming his fists against his armrests. He knew it was a lie. He had been with her every second. He knew who Mireya really was. But the words were locked inside his damaged mind. Only the sounds of a wounded animal escaped. Lissandro stared at the watch. then at Mireia. The human connection forged in the greenhouse shattered, instantly replaced by the icy detachment of a businessman realizing he's been conned. He felt like a fool, he felt exposed, and that was the one feeling he could not forgive. Why? Lissandro's voice was a whisper so cold it made Mireia shiver. I was going to pay you double. I would have given you anything you asked for. Why steal from me while using my son as a distraction? I didn't do it. Mireia stepped toward him, desperation pouring from her eyes. Mr. Lissandro, listen to me. It's a trap. She hates me. She pointed a trembling finger at Griselda. Ask Taddeo. He knows I didn't do this. But Lissandro was no longer listening. All he could see was the betrayal. Officer Ramirez stepped in close, unhitching the steel cuffs from his belt. The cold, metallic clack echoed through the entryway, a mechanical jaw ready to snap shut. Hands behind your back, the guard barked, wrenching Mireia's arm with far more aggression than the situation required. No, get off me! Mireia fought against the grip, twisting her body desperately toward the wheelchair. Taddeo, don't let them take me away. The room instantly erupted into pandemonium. Adrenaline surged through Taddeo, shattering physical barriers he had never crossed before. His frail frame, which could barely hold itself upright yesterday, suddenly coiled with explosive energy. His fingers locked onto the rims, launching the wheelchair forward like a battering ram until it slammed violently into Ramirez's shins. Mom! Taddeo screamed, hammering at the guard's legs with fists that were weak in muscle but terrifying in their fury. No! No! Startled by the boy's assault, Ramirez loosened his grip on Mireia just long enough to shove the wheelchair backward with a harsh jolt. Watch the boy! Lissandro roared, snapping out of his shock. He dove between the officer and his son, using his own body to catch the careening wheelchair. Taddeo gasped for air, his face flushed crimson and streaked with tears, looking up at his father with a soul-crushing plea. Believe her! His eyes screamed. Believe in us. But in Lissandro's calculated world, cold hard facts always outweighed gut feelings, and the watch had been in her bag. He turned his gaze to Mireia. She stood trembling, pinned by two security guards looking incredibly small, fragile, and utterly broken. The larger-than-life figure who brought joy to his son was gone. In her place stood a destitute woman caught in the gears of a wealthy man's justice. Don't arrest her, Lissandro commanded, his voice sharp. Griselda's eyes went wide with shock. But sir, the value of that watch makes this a felony. I said no, Lissandro's voice boomed, silencing the room with pure authority. I won't have the police grilling my son. No press, no scandals. He marched up to Mireia, stepping uncomfortably close. He loomed over her, close enough to see the sheer terror widening her pupils. Grab your things, he whispered, his suppressed rage far more terrifying than any shout. You have 5 minutes to vanish. If you ever step foot near this house, if you try to contact my son, or if I even see your face near my property again, I swear on my life I will spend every dime I possess to ensure you rot in a prison cell until the day you die. Mr. Lissandro, you're making a horrific mistake. Please, it's me, Mireia. This will destroy Taddeo. Don't do this for my sake, do it for his. Silence! Lissandro snapped, his composure finally cracking. Don't you dare speak his name. You used him. You manipulated a disabled child just to rob me blind. You are a cancer in this home. Mireia cast a desperate look at Taddeo, but the boy had stopped fighting. He slumped in his chair, gazing at her with a profound, bottomless sorrow, realizing the dream was truly over. I'm so sorry, my love, Mireia called out to Taddeo, ignoring the guards. Don't stop moving, you hear me? Tap, tap, boom. Keep the rhythm. Don't let them dim your light. Get her out of here, now! Lissandro ordered, turning his back to cut the connection. Ramirez shoved Mireia toward the heavy exit gates. The fight had drained out of her. She walked with her head held high, even as tears blurred her vision. Her rubber boots, the same ones that had danced with joy hours ago, now dragging heavily against the pavement. The massive wrought-iron gates slammed shut with a metallic crash that echoed like a final gunshot. Clang. Silence reclaimed the mansion, thick, suffocating, and heavy. Lissandro stood staring at the closed gates, his chest heaving. He gripped the recovered watch in his hand. The gold felt cold against his skin. There was no relief. Only a hollow emptiness remained, the gnawing sensation that he had just discarded a diamond to retrieve a lump of coal. Griselda approached Taddeo's wheelchair, plastering on a rehearsed, sickly sweet smile. It's all over, sweetie. That wicked woman is gone. Let's go inside. I'll run you a nice hot bath and you'll forget this ever happened. Tomorrow is a brand new day. She laid her hands on Tadeo's shoulders to turn the chair. The boy's reaction was instant and feral. Tadeo whipped his head around and sank his teeth into her hand, biting down with every ounce of strength he possessed. "Ah!" Griselda shrieked, recoiling and shaking her hand, now branded with a deep crimson bite mark. "Tadeo!" Lissandro gasped, horrified. But Tadeo didn't even look at his father. He stared straight at Griselda's shoes and spat on the floor. His eyes, once bright with innocence, had darkened into abysses of pure, unadulterated hatred. With a sharp jerk, Tadeo slammed his hands onto the wheels. He wasn't waiting for anyone's help. He spun the chair around and stormed toward the house, propelling himself furiously away from the two adults who had just incinerated his world. Lissandro watched his son go. For the first time, Tadeo was moving independently, with real power and autonomy. It was exactly what Lissandro had always prayed to see. But it wasn't born from recovery. It was fueled by resentment. He shifted his gaze to Griselda. She was cradling her hand, whimpering softly. "Go get that treated," Lissandro said, his voice cold, not because of the wound, but because of everything that had just happened. He stood solitary in the driveway, swallowed by the pitch-black night, and glanced down at the watch in his grip. Tick, tick, tick. Time marched on, cruel and unyielding. "What have I done?" he whispered to the gale, but the wind offered no absolution. Inside, the sudden death of the light in Tadeo's bedroom plunged the entire estate into an abyss. The boy had gone to war. Montemore Manor felt less like a home and more like a crypt. 48 hours. That was all it took for the spark to vanish from Tadeo's eyes completely. No screaming, no throwing things. Just something far worse. Silence. A thick, suffocating quiet that crept through the opulent halls, choking the life out of spaces where Maria's cumbia used to dance. Lissandro stepped into his son's quarters, balancing a silver tray. 8 in the evening. "Hey there, son," Lissandro said, forcing a cheerfulness that tasted like ashes in his mouth. "Look what the chef whipped up, your favorite pasta. Loaded with extra cheese, just the way you love it." Tadeo lay curled on his side, his gaze fixed on the blank wall. The red wheelchair, his vessel of freedom just 2 days ago, sat neglected in the corner, draped under a sheet like forgotten furniture. The boy didn't flinch, didn't even blink. Lissandro set the tray on the nightstand, right next to the untouched lunch. And the untouched breakfast. "You've got to eat something, champ," Lissandro pleaded, sinking onto the edge of the mattress. He reached for the boy's shoulder, but Tadeo recoiled. A tiny movement, but a visceral rejection of his father's touch. "Starving yourself will only make you sick. And if you get sick, we have to go back to the hospital. You don't want that, do you?" Dead silence. Then the door creaked open, admitting Dr. Valladares, his expression grim. Lissandro shot to his feet, desperate for a pill, a procedure, any miracle money could buy. "Well?" He dragged the doctor into the hallway, pulling the door shut. "His vitals are tanking, Lissandro," the doctor said, skipping the pleasantries. "Heart rate is dangerously low. It's not viral, it's not bacterial, it's resignation. He's quitting." "What does that mean?" "It means your son has decided to shut down. Medically, it's anaclitic depression caused by traumatic separation. He's lost his anchor." The doctor removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "I'll be blunt. The boy doesn't want to be here and his body is following suit. If he doesn't eat in 12 hours, we'll have to intubate and force-feed him through a tube." The floor felt like it was crumbling beneath Lissandro's feet. Tubes, restraints, strapped to a bed again, just when he'd finally started to live. "Damn it!" Lissandro hissed, slamming his fist against the wall. Griselda appeared down the hall with fresh towels, freezing when she saw her boss unraveling. "Is the boy still throwing a tantrum, sir?" she asked, voice dripping with faux concern. "If I may, I could try feeding him the soup myself. Sometimes these things require a firm hand." Lissandro stared at her. For a split second, the mask slipped. That wasn't concern in her eyes, it was impatience. "Stay out of there," Lissandro growled. "Every time you walk in, he gets worse. You upset him." "I'm only trying to help, sir," she replied, clutching the towels tight, feigning offense. "After all, I'm the only loyal one left in this house. Unlike that thief who had us all fooled." Maria's name hit Lissandro like salt on a raw nerve. "Go to your room, Griselda. I don't want to see anyone." He retreated back into the bedroom, sinking into the armchair in the shadows to watch over his son. Tadeo lay with his eyes wide in the dark, his index finger tracing a weak pattern against the sheets. Tap, tap, tap. It was the beat. The rhythm Maria had taught him. He repeated it over and over, a distress signal, a silent prayer. Lissandro buried his face in his hands. The doubt that had been gnawing at him since he saw that watch slide out of the backpack suddenly sank its teeth in deep. What if Tadeo was right? What if his paternal instinct was wrong, and the child's intuition was the truth? But the watch, it was there. He saw it with his own eyes. Hard evidence. Irrefutable, wasn't it? The soft, rhythmic scratching of Tadeo's finger against the fabric continued. Tap, tap, tap. An accusing metronome hammering inside his skull, denying him thought, sleep, or breath. He had to be sure. Dead sure. 3 a.m. The mansion lay silent, save for the electric hum of the wine fridge in Lissandro's study. The tycoon sat at his mahogany desk, an untouched glass of whiskey resting before him. The computer monitor cast a ghostly blue pallor over his exhausted features. He couldn't shake the memory of Tadeo's hateful glare. He needed to be vindicated. He needed to see the proof of Maria's guilt one last time. Just so he could sleep. Just so he could tell himself, "You did the right thing. You protected your boy from a criminal." He logged into the internal network. Montemayor security protocol, access granted. Password entry required. Fingers flew across the keypad. Access granted to the archive. Camera 4. Master Office. October 12th. He scrubbed the timeline to 9 o'clock in the morning, right when Griselda claimed the display case had been forced open. The footage buffered and snapped into clear HD. The office sat empty. Morning sunlight filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Lissandro hit fast forward. 9:15, 9:30. The heavy office door swung inward. Lissandro leaned toward the monitor, bracing himself to see Morella's faded blue scrubs creeping in. But the figure crossing the threshold wasn't wearing blue. She was draped in severe, impeccable black. Griselda. Lissandro blinked, his brain lagging. Okay, she was the housekeeper. She had every right to be there to clean or drop off coffee, but her hands were empty. On screen, Griselda hovered in the doorway for a few seconds, scanning the hallway left and right. She had a shifty, paranoid vibe about her that Lissandro had never witnessed before. She clicked the door shut softly behind her. Lissandro felt his stomach drop through the floor. She made a beeline for the watch display. Zero hesitation. No dusting. She whipped a small key from her apron, a key that was supposed to be solely in Lissandro's possession, and popped it. You have got to be kidding me, Lissandro choked out. The woman on the screen snatched up the solid gold Rolex President. She held it up, catching the light. She admired the heist with a twisted, avaricious smirk that melted away her kindly grandmother mask and revealed something hideous. With a quick motion, she shoved it deep into her apron pocket, smoothed her uniform, and then did something that turned Lissandro's blood to ice. She glared at the desk right at the framed portrait of him and Tadeo, and flipped a rigid middle finger at the photo in pure contempt. Lissandro recoiled into his leather executive chair like he'd taken a physical blow to the chest. The whiskey tumbler left his grip and smashed against the far wall, showering the room in shards of glass and expensive scotch. A raw, guttural roar tore from his throat, a cocktail of agony, guilt, and a fury so hot it scorched his windpipe. He blew it. He had kicked the only person who unconditionally loved his son out onto the street. He had trusted the viper and crushed the angel. And Tadeo knew. The boy had tried to warn him, but he had been deaf to it. Lissandro stood up, his body vibrating with rage. His fists clenched so hard his knuckles turned bone white. He stared at the freeze frame of the thief one last time. Screw the police. Screw waiting for the sun to come up. He tore out of the office like a hurricane, storming down the corridor, all dignity and protocol forgotten. He bounded up the stairs to the service wing and halted in front of the housekeeper's suite. He didn't knock. He drove his heel into the wood with a savage kick that unloaded all his frustration, shattering the lock mechanism. The door flew open, crashing against the interior wall with a boom that shook the entire house. Griselda was sitting on her mattress, thumbing through a thick stack of cash. She jumped, sending bills fluttering into the air like confetti. "Mr. Lissandro!" she shrieked, clutching her chest. "What are you doing? You nearly gave me a heart attack." Lissandro stepped inside. He loomed over her, his shadow stretching out across the room, immense and terrifying. "You have 2 minutes," Lisandro said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. 2 minutes to tell me where Morella lives." "What? I don't know where that—" Lisandro grabbed the heavy bedside lamp and hurled it at the wardrobe mirror, shattering it into a million pieces. "Don't lie to me," he bellowed, closing the distance. "I saw the tapes. I saw you plant the watch." All the color drained from Griselda's face. She looked like a corpse. She tried to stammer something out. She fumbled for an excuse, but the murder in Lisandro's eyes paralyzed her. "Talk, or I swear you're not walking out of this room." He seized her by the straps of her nightgown and shook her hard. "Where is she?" "San Jose District," she screamed, terrified, real tears finally streaming down. "The old market area. She works there. Please, don't hurt me." Lisandro released her with disgust, like he'd touched radioactive waste. She collapsed onto the bed, trembling. "Get out!" Lisandro panted. "If you are still in my house when I get back with her, I'm dragging you to the precinct myself. And you better pray my son forgives me, because if he doesn't, I will hunt you down to the gates of hell." Lisandro spun on his heel and sprinted out. No time to change clothes. No time for comfortable shoes. He took the stairs 3 at a time, burst into the garage, and vaulted into his luxury sports car. The engine roared to life, echoing in the pre-dawn silence. San Jose. The wrong side of the tracks, a place men like him never went. He slammed the gas. The tires screeched against the asphalt as he peeled out. He'd track her down, get on his knees, pay any price. It didn't matter. The realization hit him hard. His son's survival rested entirely in the hands of the woman with the yellow gloves, the very same woman he had crushed. Lisandro's sleek black Porsche glided into the San Jose district, looking as alien as a starship touching down on a foreign world. Smooth highway blacktop vanished, replaced by beaten earth and craters that scraped the sports car's undercarriage with agonizing screeches. But Lisandro didn't give a damn about wrecking the suspension. Getting there was the only metric that mattered. Choking clouds of dust billowed in his wake. Locals froze on the cramped sidewalks, staring. Shoeless kids chased the vehicle, fingers pointing at the obscene display of wealth invading their poverty-stricken reality. One hand gripped the leather steering wheel while the other frantically wiped away the cold sweat beading on his brow. His navigation system had given up the ghost 3 blocks back. Out here, digital maps were useless blank screens. He slammed on the brakes before a plaza teeming with makeshift stalls, the beating heart of the local market. The cacophony was overwhelming. Hawkers shouting their wares, static heavy music blaring from ancient radios, and the sharp barks of street strays. Stepping out of the climate-controlled cabin, he was walloped by a thick cocktail of scents. Fried grease, overripe fruit, and raw sewage. He stood there in his rumpled 3-piece Italian suit, tie loosened and hanging limp, looking like a shipwrecked aristocrat. "I need to find Maria," he hollered at an elderly woman flipping tortillas on the corner. "She works here." The woman eyed him with deep suspicion, then spat on the ground, missing his polished leather shoes by an inch. "Plenty of Marias around here, boss. Which one do you want? The one in debt or the one collecting?" "The one who—" "The dancer?" Lisandro stammered, feeling absurd. "Young, curly hair. Please, this is a matter of life and death." The old woman squinted, gauging the raw panic etched onto the rich man's face. She pointed a gnarled finger toward the rear of the market, where massive trucks were offloading freight. "Over at the loading docks hauling potatoes," Lisandro bolted. He sprinted past chickens, hurdled puddles of black sludge, and shoved through the crowd. His heart hammered against his ribs with bruising force. He reached the trucking bay and froze. The sight of her hit him like a gut punch, worse than any physical blow he'd ever taken. Gone were her pristine blue scrubs. Maria stood in filthy denim and a gray t-shirt drenched in sweat. She was hoisting a wooden crate overflowing with tomatoes onto her shoulder. Her arms, the same gentle arms that had cradled Tadeo, were now corded with muscle, straining under the brutal exertion. A heavy-set foreman barked from the truck bed. "Pick up the pace, girl. You don't clear this by noon, you don't see a dime." Maria stayed silent. She just clenched her jaw, ducked her head, and staggered toward the warehouse, buckling under the load. Lisandro felt infinitely small. To stroke his own ego, he'd accused her of stealing a watch worth more than she'd make in 10 years of breaking her back like this. He had destroyed her reputation, yet here she was, not giving up, but working herself to the bone to survive with her head held high. "Mireya!" Lisandro's voice cracked. She halted mid-step. Hearing her name in that familiar cadence froze her blood. She turned slowly, the heavy crate still balanced on her shoulder. When she locked eyes with him, there was no welcome, only terror. She stumbled back, nearly toppling over. "I didn't do it," she screamed, recoiling, convinced he'd brought the cops to finish her off. "I left. Just leave me alone." Lissandro stepped forward, oblivious to the muck splashing onto his trousers. "Mireya, please, just listen. Stay back." She dropped the crate, sending tomatoes rolling across the filth, bursting under their own weight. The foreman launched a tirade of curses, but Lissandro was deaf to it. "You here to gloat? Want to see how the other half lives? You got your watch back. Go back to your palace and let us starve in peace." A crowd formed around them, a tight ring of hostile faces ready to defend one of their own. Lissandro stood alone, deep in enemy lines, but fear was absent. All he saw was the exhaustion in her red-rimmed eyes and the sheer injustice of it all. "I'm not here to mock you," Lissandro gasped, raising his hands in surrender. I came because I'm a damn fool." A hush swept over the loading dock. The foreman shut his mouth. Mireya stared at him, baffled, her chest heaving from both the labor and the shock. "What?" she whispered. "I checked the footage," Lissandro said, his voice cutting through the sudden quiet. "I saw Griselda. I saw what she did. I know you were innocent the whole time. You were framed, and I was blind enough to fall for it." Mireya wiped her eyes with the back of a grimy hand, smearing dirt across her cheek. A wave of relief crashed into her, instantly followed by a surge of fury. "So now you know," she said, her voice trembling with bitterness. 2 days too late. Do you have any idea what it's like to be thrown out like a common criminal? You have no idea what it feels like to be looked at like dirt. You rely on security cameras to see the truth, Mr. Lissandro. Down here, all we have is our word, and mine meant absolutely nothing to you." Lissandro just nodded, fighting to swallow the lump in his throat. He took every blow, knowing he deserved the judgment. "You're right. It meant nothing because I was too arrogant to listen. I trusted a gold watch more than my own son's happiness. I don't expect forgiveness. Honestly, I don't deserve it." He stepped closer, completely ignoring the menacing glares of the dock workers creeping up with clubs, thinking he was a threat to her. "But it's Taddeo!" Lissandro's voice cracked the moment he said his son's name. "Taddeo is dying, Mireya." Instantly her stone-cold expression shattered. "What?" she asked, her voice dropping to a terrified whisper. "What happened?" "He won't eat. He won't move." Lissandro broke down right there in front of 100 strangers, stripping away his status, his wealth, and his pride. "He's given up. He just lies in bed, staring blankly at the wall. The doctor says it's a matter of hours before we have to put him back on life support. He hates me, Mireya. My own son hates me, and he's right. But he's calling for you. He taps his finger. He taps out that rhythm. Click, click, boom. He's asking for you." Mireya covered her mouth, stifling a sob. The midday sun beat down relentlessly on the market, yet nobody moved a muscle. The raw emotion of the moment froze everyone in place. A millionaire weeping before a tomato packer. Then, Lissandro did something no one in his elite circle would have ever conceived. Something that would forever destroy his reputation as the Iceman. He dropped to his knees, driving his designer suit trousers straight into the black, rotting muck of the market floor. He clasped his hands together, not like a man praying to God, but like a desperate soul begging his last hope on earth for mercy. "I'm begging you," Lissandro said, looking up into her eyes. "Don't come back for the money. I'll give you anything, sure, but I know you don't care about that. Come back for him. Save him. Because I have all the money in the world, and I'm completely useless. You are the only thing keeping him alive." A murmur rippled through the crowd as the market women crossed themselves. The foreman awkwardly took off his cap. Mireya looked down at the kneeling man, seeing nothing but his raw desperation and naked guilt. She could have left him there. She could have spit on him and told him to go to hell, finally getting revenge for the humiliation he put her through. Her wounded pride was screaming at her to do exactly that. But then she thought of Taddeo. She pictured his eyes lighting up when he tossed the pizza dough. She remembered his shout of victory as he raised his arm in triumph. She thought of that little boy trapped in a silent golden cage, waiting for a specific sound, a rhythm only she knew how to create. Mireya closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The stench of the market faded away. All she could hear was that rhythm in her head. Click, click, boom. She opened her eyes. Her gaze was hard, determined. "Get up," she said, her voice steady. Lissandro looked at her, afraid to move a muscle. I said get up, Lisandro, she repeated, dropping the mister for the first time. The hierarchy was officially broken. They were equals now, or perhaps she was the one in charge. Lisandro scrambled to his feet, filthy and defeated. I'm not coming back for you, Mireia said, poking him in the chest and leaving a smudge of dirt on his white shirt. Not for your money, and not for your mansion. If I come back, it's because that little boy doesn't deserve to suffer just because his father is blind to what matters. Thank you, Lisandro whispered. Don't thank me yet. I have conditions. She cut him off sharply. New rules. Lisandro nodded frantically. Anything, whatever you say. 1. Griselda goes. I don't want to see her face ever again. If she's in that house, I don't step foot inside. Done. She's out today. 2. No more ridiculous medical protocols. If Tadeo wants to go out in the sun, he goes out. If he wants to get dirty, let him get dirty. You do not interfere. I'm his therapist, his friend, and I'm running this show. You're just the dad who stands on the sidelines and claps. Understood? Lisandro gulped. It meant total surrender of control, his biggest fear. But the image of Tadeo lying motionless in bed flashed in his mind. Understood. You're in charge. And 3. Mireia leaned in close, lowering her voice. You are going to apologize to Tadeo. Not with gifts, not with toys. You're going to look him in the eye, ask for forgiveness, and admit you were wrong. Because kids forgive, but they never forget a lie. Lisandro felt the crushing weight of that demand. It was the hardest condition yet. It required genuine humility in front of his own son. I'll do it, he promised. Mireia gave a sharp nod. She turned to the foreman whose jaw was still on the floor. I quit. She turned back to Lisandro and pointed at the dusty sports car. Start the engine. Tadeo has been waiting for 2 days. Let's not make him wait another minute. As they climbed into the vehicle, the visual contrast was jarring. The cream leather seats were instantly smeared with Mireia's grime and Lisandro's mud, but neither of them gave a damn. The engine roared to life and the car sped out of Barrio San Jose, leaving behind both poverty and pride, racing against the clock toward a mansion where a tiny heart was threatening to stop beating forever. Not a word was spoken during the drive back. Lisandro had the pedal to the floor, blowing through red lights without a second thought. Mireia stared out the window, hands clasped tight in her lap, silently praying they weren't too late. By the time the gates of the Montemayor estate swung open, the sun was dipping low, painting the sky a violent blood-red hue. Lisandro screeched to a halt at the front entrance, not even bothering to kill the engine before they both bolted for the house. The grand entrance stood wide open. Inside, Griselda was wrestling 2 massive suitcases, arguing with the guard who refused to let her leave until the boss returned. When she saw Lisandro and Mireia burst in, filthy and frantic, her face went white, and she dropped the bags. Sir, please, I can explain, Griselda stammered, taking a nervous step back. Mireia didn't even spare her a glance. She stormed past like a hurricane, completely ignoring the woman who had tried to ruin her life. Her only focus was upstairs. Lisandro, however, paused for a split second to confront Griselda. Get out, Lisandro commanded. He didn't scream. His voice was a chilling whisper. And leave the bags. I paid for everything inside them. Leave with the clothes on your back. Now. Griselda opened her mouth to protest, but one look at Lisandro's lethal glare silenced her. She spun around and ran empty-handed into the night, vanishing from their story forever. Lisandro took the stairs 2 at a time, chasing after Mireia. They reached Tadeo's room to find the door shut and the silence deafening. Mireia's hand trembled as she reached for the knob. She glanced back at Lisandro, who nodded for her to go ahead, and they pushed the door open. Shadows filled the room. Tadeo hadn't moved. He was still curled up in a tight ball, looking smaller and more fragile than ever. Mireia stepped inside softly and sat on the edge of the mattress. Hey there, handsome, she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. I heard there was a party going on in here, but it looks like the DJ is asleep on the job. Tadeo didn't flinch. His mind struggled to register the sound. It had to be a dream. He'd hallucinated her voice a dozen times over the last 48 hours. But then, Mireia began to drum a gentle rhythm on the mattress. Tap, tap, thud. Tap, tap, thud. Tadeo went rigid, then slowly turned his head. His hollow, sorrowful eyes locked onto Mireia's face, grimy, tear-streaked, but beaming with a smile. Recognition hit him like a lightning bolt. Tadeo tried to scream, but his voice failed him. Mireia lunged forward and wrapped him in her arms. Tadeo buried his face in her neck, sobbing, clutching her sweaty shirt like it was his oxygen supply. "I'm here, baby. I'm right here. No one is ever taking me away again, no one." Lissandro watched from the doorway, silent tears streaming down his face as he witnessed life returning to his son with every hug and shared sob. He knew he had to step in. He had to fulfill the third condition. It was time for his final act of redemption. The air in the room felt thick, charged with static electricity. It was that heavy vibration that hangs in the air right after a violent storm passes. Tadeo was still clinging to Mireia, his face buried in her shoulder, inhaling the scent of sweat and earth she'd brought from the market, a smell that to him meant safety. Lissandro took a hesitant step forward from the doorway. His $3,000 shoes were caked in dry mud and his crisp white shirt was ruined. Yet he had never looked more like a man and less like a statue than he did right now. "Tadeo," Lissandro said. His voice wavered. It wasn't the commanding tone of a CEO closing a deal, it was the broken voice of a father begging for mercy. Tadeo went stiff in Mireia's arms. He slowly turned his head, peeking out with one red, swollen eye. He stared at his father, his gaze a heartbreaking mix of fear and deep distrust. The boy couldn't forget the screaming, the police, the betrayal. Mireia rubbed his back soothingly, leaning in to whisper in his ear. "Listen, champ, just hear him out. Real men know how to listen." Lissandro approached the bed but didn't sit. Instead, he dropped to his knees on the rug, lowering himself until he was looking up at his son. "Son," Lissandro began, swallowing hard against the lump in his throat. "I messed up. I was so stupid. I thought I was protecting you, but I was only protecting my own fear." Tadeo stared at him, unblinking. "I hurt Mireia," Lissandro continued, gesturing toward her. "And I hurt you. I never should have doubted you. You knew the truth all along, and I just refused to see it." Lissandro laid his hand palm up on the duvet. He didn't try to touch Tadeo. He just offered his hand and waited. "I don't know if you can ever forgive me, Tadeo, but I promise you this. Starting today, I'm not calling the shots anymore. You are. If you say Mireia stays, she stays forever. If you want to dance, we'll dance. If you want to scream, we'll scream together. But please don't shut down again. Without you, I'm nothing." A single tear rolled down Lissandro's cheek and landed on his outstretched palm. The silence stretched on, agonizingly long. Mireia held her breath. Then, movement. Tadeo's hand stirred, a slow, uncertain tremor. His pale, slender fingers trailed across the crisp linens. They found their destination, Lissandro's rough, weathered palm, and closed around it. The grip was faint, barely there, yet it carried the weight of a solemn vow. "Dad," Tadeo rasped, his voice thick with emotion. Lissandro squeezed his eyes shut, a shuddering sob wrecking his composure. He bowed his head, pressing his lips to the boy's knuckles, washing them in silent tears. "Thank you, son. Just thank you." Nearby, Mireia offered a misty-eyed smile. She laid her own hand atop theirs, completing the circle. "Right then," she announced, her signature no-nonsense attitude slicing through the heavy atmosphere. "Tears are done, forgiveness is signed. Now, it's time to hustle, Tadeo. That cold pasta your father dragged in won't cut it. You need protein to build muscle. To the kitchen, gentlemen. And this time, Mr. Lissandro, you're on onion duty." Lissandro looked up, a crooked, honest grin finally reaching his eyes. "Yes, ma'am. Onions it is." 3 months later, the Montemayor estate had shed its museum-like sterility. It finally felt like a place where people actually lived. Gone were the suffocating velvet drapes, sunlight now flooded every corner. The main hall, once deadly quiet, hummed with the soft rhythmic beat of tropical tunes. Out in the backyard, the once pristine lawn bore the scars of life. Trampled grass, patches of churned earth, footprints of a struggle. It was a glorious Saturday morning, and the sun was blazing. Lissandro stood by the pool, having traded his bespoke suits for athletic gear, a sight his staff probably never thought possible. He gripped a towel and a water bottle, practically vibrating with nervous energy. Mireia commanded the center of the lawn, standing beside a gleaming set of parallel bars Lissandro had commissioned a month prior. And there, framed by the steel, was Tadeo. He wasn't in his chair. He was upright, locking onto the bars with a grip so tight his knuckles had turned bone white. His arms shook like leaves in a storm, sweat stinging his eyes, but he refused to break his hold. His legs, while still slender, showed hints of muscle definition that had been completely absent 90 days ago. It had been absolute torture. Shouting matches, tears, days, Tadeo begged to quit, but Maria's brand of tough love pushed him through. "Come on, Tadeo!" Maria barked, her voice steel, stripped of any pity. "I'm not holding you up. That's you. That is 100% you." Lissandro lurched forward, instinct taking over as Tadeo's knees began to buckle. "Stay put," Maria commanded, not even glancing at the father. "Help him now, and you make him weak. He's got this." Lissandro froze, chewing his lip in agony. Watching his son struggle was the hardest lesson of his life, but growth demanded pain. "Maria, I'm going down." Tadeo groaned through gritted teeth. "You are not falling," she shot back. "Eyes up. Look ahead. Who's standing there?" Tadeo forced his head up. At the end of the track, 3 meters of green away, stood his father. Lissandro's arms were wide open, a harbor waiting for the ship. "Eyes on me, son," Lissandro called out. "I'm right here. Come and get me." Tadeo took a shuddering breath and squeezed his eyes shut for a heartbeat. In the dark behind his eyelids, he found the rhythm. Clack, clack, boom. The beat of the wooden spoon, the thumping of his own heart. He snapped his eyes open and released the right bar. His balance wavered, his body swaying like a sapling. "One!" Maria roared. Tadeo dragged his right foot forward. It was clumsy, scraping the ground, heavy as lead. But it was a step. He let go of the left bar. Now, nothing held him up but 2 shaking legs and sheer, unadulterated willpower. 2, Maria counted, fists clenched white. Tadeo took the second step. His knees knocked together, but he stayed vertical. The world seemed to grind to a halt. Birdsong vanished. The wind held its breath. There was only Tadeo and those 3 infinite meters of grass. He took a third step, and gravity finally won. "Dad!" Tadeo cried out as he pitched forward. But he never hit the dirt. Lissandro moved like a strike of lightning. He snatched his son out of the air, wrapping his powerful arms around the frail frame before harm could befall him. The momentum sent them both sprawling onto the grass, tumbling over one another. A beat of terrified silence followed as Lissandro frantically checked the boy. "Are you okay? Where does it hurt?" Tadeo lay on his back, gasping for air, staring up at the azure sky. Then the laughter started. Not the timid giggle from before, but a loud, victorious roar bubbling up from the bottom of his strengthening lungs. "I walked!" Tadeo shouted, thumping his father's chest. "Dad, I walked 3 whole steps, no hands!" Lissandro joined in, his laughter cracking, dissolving into tears of sheer, unmanageable joy. He crushed his son in a hug, grass stains ruining his clothes, soaking in the messiness of life. "You walked, champ? You absolutely soared." Maria made her way over, dropping to her knees in the grass, exhausted but beaming. Lissandro reached out, shattering the last of the professional boundaries, and pulled her into the huddle. Just the 3 of them. The tycoon, the former maid, and the boy who defied every doctor's prediction. A tangle of laughter and limbs sprawled out under the sun. "Hey, you know what?" Tadeo suddenly piped up, sitting up in the grass to face the 2 adults. "I'm starving." Lissandro wiped the tears from his face and pulled himself up. "What are you in the mood for? Anything. You name it, you got it." "Pizza," Tadeo said, shooting a cheeky grin at Maria. "But we have to make it ourselves. And this time, Dad's on cleanup duty." Maria burst into laughter. "It's a deal." Lissandro looked at his son, then at Maria, and finally at the house. It didn't feel like a cage anymore. It was a castle. His gaze fell to his wrist, resting on the famous Rolex president he'd fought so hard to reclaim. Slowly, he unclasped the band. "What are you doing?" Maria asked. Lissandro stared at the solid gold timepiece, the ultimate symbol of his status, the very object for which he had nearly destroyed everything. "It keeps bad time," he muttered. With a casual flick of his wrist, he tossed the $50,000 watch straight into the deep end of the pool. It hit the water with a barely audible plop, shimmering as it sank into the blue abyss to be forgotten forever. "My time is measured differently now," Lissandro said, standing tall and offering one hand to Maria and the other to Tadeo. "It's measured in footsteps." He helped them to their feet, and the 3 of them began the slow trek toward the house, moving strictly at Tadeo's pace. 1 step, 2 steps, a pause, a laugh. It wasn't a perfect stride, but to Lissandro it was the most beautiful walk he had ever witnessed. They weren't rushing to a board meeting. They were going to make pizza. They were going to live. As they crossed the threshold of the French doors, Tadeo turned back toward the empty garden one last time, raised his fist to the sun, and whispered, "Tick-tock, boom, the end." End.